Good sex is always intentional. You may have been, naturally, obviously attracted to each other sexually when you met, but we can enjoy sex for the rest of our married lives. Research proves that people are enjoying sex 70s, 80s, longer than ever because we're living longer and because of medical technology, but it's always intentional. It's never by accident. And listen, don't let the devil tell you the lie that if you married the right person, that it would just happen naturally and you wouldn't have to work at it. That's just not true. You always have to put energy into the relationship regardless. But the other thing about striking your sexual match is it's how to take the natural differences that are between us and to make them dynamic rather than dangerous. God made us different by His design. We're very, very different. And when you understand those differences, it's dynamic. But when you don't, it's a very dangerous thing. And so sex demonstrates how different we are, but complementary. When I was in college, my job was to pull pipe fittings and pipe. When I first started, I didn't know, any kind of pipe fitting. And so I walked up one day and I noticed on my order, it said male pipe fitting. And I thought, what, male pipe fitting? And then I noticed down on the bottom, it said female pipe fitting. And I went to this guy that I worked with and I said, what's a male and a female pipe fitting? And he was kind of an old, gruff guy, and he said, come here, kid. So he walked me down the aisle of the pipe area there, and he grabbed a male fitting and said, this is a male fitting. And then he grabbed another fitting, and he said, this is a female fitting. And he put them together, and I thought, oh my gosh, hardware people are perverts. They work in a porn shop here. And so it was embarrassing because I thought, I just can't believe they call them male, and I'm doing my hands, I gotta stop doing that. But I can't believe they call them that, but it's interesting, God designed us so differently to complement each other. Nature tells us we need each other, and we fit. Sex tells us that our differences have a dynamic to them, and that we fit. And here's what male and female means. It takes two to make one. God looked at Adam and said, he's incomplete. And then He made Eve and said, they two shall become one. And nothing in our marriage demonstrates that more than sex. And something happens when we're having sex that doesn't happen in any other point in our marriage, something very dynamic and something very important. We are very dependent upon each other. See, if you could meet your own needs, you wouldn't get married. And again, the differences in our sexuality tell us a female needs a male and a male needs a female. But the point is this, it's going to take both of us with a good attitude to meet each other's needs. It's going to take both of us doing our part to be able to have intimacy and sex. I can't do it by myself. If I could be single. But since I can't, I'm depending on you, okay? And our sexuality is also threefold. A lot of times the mistake that we make is looking at sexuality one-dimensionally. In other words, we look at sex and just say, sex is something that happens in the physical realm. It does not. To have sex the way that God intended, it is spiritual, emotional, and physical. And that's what I want to talk about. The spiritual element of sex. The most important area of intimacy is spiritual intimacy. If you could see the way that God sees, what you would see is the deepest part of you is your spirit. Now listen to what the word intimacy means. It means inner closeness. It means close on the inside. That's what intimacy means. When you're saying, I want to be intimate with my spouse, what you're saying is, I don't want just a superficial relationship. You can be having sex with someone who's a million miles away from you emotionally, and they're checked out. Okay, intimacy means I know you. You've opened up your heart to me, and I've opened up my heart to you, and we're one. Now, when we're born, we are born with the spiritual void. Adam and Eve sinned, and they died spiritually. And every single one of us are born spiritually dead. And when we're born again, what that means, I was saved a week before Karen and I got married. And being born again means the Spirit of God, there's a Jesus-sized hole on the inside of us that money can't fill, that people can't fill, that a job or education can't fill. Nothing in life is going to fill the inner emptiness in my life until Jesus comes in. And when Jesus comes in, I'm born again spiritually. My dead spirit becomes alive, and God moves on the inside of me. When you're born again, this is why we shouldn't marry an unbeliever. And sometimes we're both lost, and then one of us gets saved or whatever. But we want to both be believers, because when you also have Jesus living on the inside of you, we can now enjoy spiritual intimacy where the deepest part of you and the deepest part of me are in communion. The greatest intimacy is not mental intimacy. The greatest intimacy is not emotional intimacy or sexual intimacy. The greatest intimacy is spiritual intimacy. And Karen and I, people ask us, the secret of our marriage, God. God is the secret of our marriage. God is the secret of why we're together. And the greatest intimacy that we experience is the spiritual part of our relationship.
Gain instant access to XO conferences and other dynamic marriage teachings with XO Now, the new on-demand video streaming subscription from XO and MarriageToday. For only $9 a month, you receive access to life-giving marriage series from Jimmy Evans, Dave and Ashley Willis, and other MarriageToday speakers. Access XO Now from all your favorite devices. Sync content for offline viewing and enjoy world-class marriage content wherever, whenever. Learn how to be married and stay married. A better marriage is possible with the right information and a mutual commitment to success. Even the most unhealthy relationships can be healed. As part of your subscription, you have full access to the complete sessions from the latest XO conference. Be the first to receive MarriageToday's best content with your subscription to XO Now. Start your free trial today at xonow.tv.
Here's how to create spiritual intimacy in your marriage. And number one is to respect the spiritual nature of marriage and regard it as sacred. Now, you may have heard people say, it's just a piece of paper. Marriage is just a piece of paper. Marriage is an act of the Spirit of God, and it's a covenant. Now, listen to me. The word covenant means to cut. When marriage was, it's a sacrificial, permanent bond, and it only works that way. When marriage was created, Adam was cut and he bled. Okay. And so blood, Jesus said, this is the new covenant in my blood. Marriage only works as a covenant bond where, here's what I'm saying, I will sacrificially love you till the day that I die. A covenant has no end date. If it has an end date, it's not a covenant. So this is permanent until death, and it is sacrificial. That's the nature of this relationship. There's a covenant marriage and there's a contract marriage. A contract marriage is what we have in America, and it's cheap and it's as worthless as the paper that it's written on. A contract marriage says this: I'm going to protect my rights and limit my responsibilities to you. I've got one foot out the back door if you mess with me. I'm going to protect my rights, and I'm going to limit my responsibilities. A covenant says, I sacrifice my rights and I assume responsibility. Jesus came, sacrificed his right to be the Son of God, came down to earth, lived a miserable life, suffered a miserable death, and now he's our Savior. Who's glad about that? And he didn't do it protecting his rights. He did it sacrificing. And when we come to him and we join in the new covenant, we sacrifice our lives for Jesus. We give our lives to him. Jesus said, he who saves his life will lose it, and he who loses his life will save it. So let me say this. In marriage, you get what you pay for. If you want a contract, it's worth what you paid for it. And what it does is it establishes a very, very shaky foundation for intimacy and sex and a life built together. How can you build a life with someone who's got their bags half packed all the time? How can you build a life with someone who's never demonstrated true sacrifice and has never really demonstrated that they're totally committed to the relationship? Divorce is not an option. We're in this thing for the rest of our lives. It's till death do us part. That is the spirit of a covenant marriage. And listen, every covenant has a seal and a sign. When God makes a covenant, every covenant has a seal and a sign. And they're sacred to God. Covenant signs are sacred. When God made a covenant with Noah, the rainbow was the seal and the sign. When God made a covenant with Abraham, circumcision was the seal and the sign. When Jesus entered the new covenant. The seal of the new covenant is water baptism, and the sign is communion. The Bible tells us that water baptism is the same, Colossians says, is the same as the Old Testament circumcision. And communion is the sign. Every covenant has a seal and a sign, and they're sacred to God. Okay, so what if marriage is a covenant? What is the sign and the seal? Sex. When we get married, sex consummates the bond of marriage. That's the way God designed it. We don't have sex before marriage. That's the way God designed it. And then I come and I commit my life to you in covenant, and then after making that covenant vow, we seal that with sex. And then the sign, the seal means it's a done deal. Jesus, you're Lord of my life. I'm water baptized. It's a done deal. This is the outward sign of an inward decision that I've made. It's not something I've privately done in my heart. I've done it publicly before witnesses. This is the sign, the seal. What's the sign? It is the constant sign to you that I'm walking in good faith with the commitment that I made. So in Christianity, it's communion. I'm baptized one time, but regularly I take communion. What does communion say? I remember. Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. I remember, Jesus. I remember what you did for me, and I remember the commitment I made to you. I'm walking in good faith, and I'm bearing the sign of the covenant that we have together. What is the covenant sign of marriage? Sex. Every time I'm having sex with you, what I'm saying is, I remember the commitment that I made, that sacred covenant that we made. And I may not like you right now. I may be ticked at you right now. I may have 300 other things to do right now, but I'm going to have sex with you just to remind myself of the commitment that I made. And my attitude will be better afterwards, I'm sure. I'm hoping. That's a good marriage. To the degree that you're pure in sex, and I'm not talking about being a prude, because God wants us to enjoy sex and have fun having sex in marriage. To the degree that you're pure is to the degree that sex will be fulfilling for you. I've never met a sex addict that was fulfilled. Ever, 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 ever. Sex addiction is a bondage, and it sucks the life out of you. But when you commit yourself to one person, to be intimate with one person, that's how sex becomes special. And we just tell ourselves, sex is sacred. It's something only between us, and I'll never justify taking it outside of our marriage. And if I'm tempted, I'm wrong, and I'm going to take it to Jesus and become accountable. But here's the issue. You want to pray together, worship together, make the spiritual element of your marriage the most important area of your marriage.
Since 1994, MarriageToday has used every medium at its disposal to strengthen families and marriages through its diverse ministry outreaches. Every day across North America and around the world, we provide help and hope through television, live events, social media, crisis coaching, and over 100 unique resources. There is a fierce battle being fought for marriage right now, but we can win it. We want to raise the standard. We want to unite families, restore marriages, and conquer divorce. At MarriageToday, we believe every marriage has a 100% chance of success if you do it God's way.
Let me tell you why I trust Karen. Because she's a godly woman. Karen's conscience before God is why I trust her. Because I'm a human being and she's a human being. And we're not better than anybody else, and anyone can fall. I could fall sexually. Absolutely no doubt about it. What's the insurance policy that I won't? My relationship with Jesus Christ. And us praying together and worshiping together and valuing the spiritual element of our marriage creates the greatest spiritual intimacy and trust in our relationship that then opens the door to sexual intimacy. It is the most, and let me say this now. According to a survey, Sex in America, it was a definitive survey, Grand Central America, the most sexually satisfied couples and most orgasmic women are Christians and married. It puts into men and women's minds this picture, well, if you're married and you're a Christian, well, you know, you're having sex, but the fun is out in the city being single and sexual. The fun's out there on the dark side. It's exactly the opposite. Those people have less sex and less satisfying sex. The best sex is in a Christian, monogamous, heterosexual, committed marriage. Give yourselves a hand. You have the best sex of anybody. It's the truth. Because the spiritual element is the most important element. That's why that we have the best sex of anybody. And I'm not saying you necessarily do, but you may have to work on some issues, but you have the best shot at it when spirituality is important. Number 2 is the emotional match. Here are the top 5 reasons why couples fight. Top 5. Number 1 is work stress. Number 2 is money. 3 is children. 4 is sex. And 5 is housework. Work stress, money, children, sex, and housework. Okay? And let me tell you why we fight. Because you don't care how I feel. You don't care how I feel about you working all the time. You don't care how I feel about you leaving the house dirty and not helping me when you get home. You don't care how I feel about the kids and the kids being neglected or the kids not being disciplined. You don't care how I feel. And when our spouse is saying something to us, typically it's something that we don't understand because we're not in their world, and a lot of times we don't understand their perspective. But here's what your spouse needs most from you when they're emoting: validation. Validation. I may not understand what you're saying, but it's important to me because you're important to me. Rather than rolling your eyes, rather than just walking away in disagreement and not validating them. There was a man talking to me last week, and he was telling me about an interaction that he had with his wife, and they have absolutely no intimacy whatsoever. And he was telling me something she said to him, and I said, well, what did you say? He said, I just laughed. And I said, in other words, you didn't validate anything she had to say. And he said, huh? He thought laughing at her, she said something, he just went, huh. And she walked away hurt. And he thought that was intelligent on his part. And I said, what she needed from you was validation. She needed you to say to her, honey, it's important. I don't understand everything you're saying, but it's important because you're saying it. My emotions, listen, my emotions may not be right, but they're real. And I would say, this is an inexact, scientific survey based on me. I would say half the time I'm talking to Karen, my emotions are real but not right. Half the time. So when I'm talking to her about something, my emotions aren't right. I can think of dozens of examples of times I've been talking to Karen about something, but they were real. And so when I'm talking to Karen and I'm talking to her about how I feel, I'm not attacking, I'm just telling her how I feel. Here's what I need from her is, Jimmy, that's important. I validate how you feel. I may not agree with it, but I validate. And when you validate the way that I feel, listen, and I don't have to pay a price for being honest. Research proves that couples who never disagree have bad marriages. I'm not talking about fighting all the time. I'm talking about giving your spouse the right to disagree without paying a price. I'm hurt. I'm frustrated. You're not helping around the house. I feel like I'm taking care of the kids all the time by myself, and you don't care. I feel like you work all the time. I feel like your friends are more important than me. I feel. And emotional intimacy comes from the place of saying to your spouse, are you doing okay? Now listen, you're not a good husband until your wife tells you you are. You can go buy yourself one of those World's Best Husbands t-shirts. It's better for your wife to buy it. Because if you buy it for yourself, you're just trying to let her know. But if she buys it for you, she's trying to let the world know. You're not a good wife until your husband tells you are. And here's what makes a great marriage, is sitting down with each other and saying, am I doing a good job? Are your needs being met? Am I hurting you? Is there anything I'm doing that's frustrating you? and sitting down sincerely and without any defensiveness and saying, except for serving Jesus, my most important mission in life is to fulfill you. I know you depend upon me for that. You can't fulfill yourself or we wouldn't have gotten married. And I don't want to strand you in a loveless relationship as I go do something else and take you for granted. Am I doing a good job? How can I improve? And when you have two people that conscientious and are willing to open up and not be defensive and now listen to what your spouse is saying. Karen and I today can open up with each other and talk with each other without fear. But I remember when I didn't want the answer to that question, I would have never sat down with Karen and asked her because she would have answered it. And I would have had to have changed. So emotional intimacy simply means this: I care about your emotions. They might be right or wrong, but they're real. And if I agree or disagree, I will validate what you're saying and give you the right to express it without paying a price, unless you're being cruel, unless you're being mean or something like that. But I want us to have an emotional intimacy, and I want us to be our safe place to each other.
Wow. Every time we hear Jimmy Evans, I learn something new.
Every single time. He is one of the most gifted marriage teachers on the planet. We've been learning from him for years, and now it's a privilege to be working with him in this work of building stronger marriages. But just like you watching him now, I'm sure you took a lot away from that, and we want to help you get even more access to Jimmy Evans videos, because what you've just seen is actually just a portion of a full series from Jimmy Evans.
That's right. You can see the entire series plus more marriage building videos on XO Now.
You can learn from the best experts, including, of course, Jimmy Evans, and get unlimited access for only $9 a month.
This is the best way to get immediate marriage help and encouragement from the full Marriage Today video library.
Yeah, and of course, all of our content is also included, along with brand new exclusive marriage building content you can't get anywhere else.
So don't miss out on the best marriage videos that are out there. Subscribe now at xonow.tv.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be continuing the conversation about how to develop an even stronger emotional connection, and really a stronger connection on every level with your spouse. And we've got some great questions talking about specific struggles, and hopefully these will resonate with you as well.
That's right. First question says, talking about money always results in us having a fight. It is an issue we've always seemed to disagree on. Tension will linger for a few days and then we will move on. I'm tired of this cycle. What can we do to get back on the same page?
Wow, I think most couples can relate to this. In fact, I saw a study recently that says stress over money is now one of the top 2 reasons people list for divorce, which is ironic because divorce will wreck your finances more than anything you can do in marriage just about. But getting on the same page financially is one of the most important things you can do in marriage. And there are so many great tools out there. Some things that have helped us over the years is Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University.
Oh, yeah.
Crown Financial Ministries also has some great resources. There's an app called Every Dollar, which is a free app that can help you just plan and budget where your money's going and just feel like you're taking control back over your finances. And then just having a policy of communication, something we implemented early on because we made some terrible financial decisions early on. I mean, we blew it. We thought credit cards were the same thing as money. I mean, we got deep in debt and it caused a lot of stress. And so as we started climbing out of that, we communicated about purchases, and even something we do still is if either of us are going to spend something over a $50 threshold that is out of the regular norm, like groceries and things,
gas, things like that.
We'll communicate with each other like, hey, sweetie, I'm getting ready to buy these shoes or buy this. Is that okay? Are we, just making sure that it's being communicated. And it's not so much about asking permission, it's about respecting each other enough to really have the conversation about it.
It's so true. I think I was talking, about this with some girlfriends. I think it's really just out of respect.
Sure.
I mean, 9 times out of 10, you will tell me, yeah, that's good, and I'll tell you the same thing. But it's just about, having respect for one another and looking at your finances as a joint effort.
Right.
Because I think a lot of marriages today, they have separate finances. And they do it thinking, oh, it's better if we just don't talk about it. And so we have our own separate bank accounts,
so they live like
everything.
They're divorced. It's 2 separate accounts, 2 separate everything, sharing bills like roommates. And I'm not saying everybody who has separate accounts has a terrible marriage or anything, but I am saying I do question if they're really understanding the biblical concept of marriage as it relates to their finances.
Right.
If they're doing it all
Because
separately.
if you never talk about it, then there's one part of your marriage where you're never going to be on the same page because you're literally not talking about it. So I do think it's just really important to have a very honest conversation. And if you disagree on how to spend money, do one of those apps that kind of get you on that same page and on the same budget.
Yeah, and then work to get out of debt, because debt will cause stress faster than anything. And there are great
Absolutely.
tools out there to help with that. So here's the next question. It says, I have talked to my husband a few times about how I wish our marriage could be better. He says we're just fine and seems to just dismiss me. How can I let him know he's not understanding my feelings while still showing him respect? This is complicated. And I think what I would say to that husband is maybe the reason why he's dismissing it is because of an insecurity in him of not wanting to, he feels like I'm doing what I know how to do. And so for her to say things aren't fine means that she's saying I'm not measuring up, and he's taking it personally.
Right.
And you can't take it personally. What she's saying is, I want to be even closer to you. I want our relationship to be all that it can be. And I think a good policy is that if either spouse ever says, I want our marriage to be stronger, or I think something is off in our marriage and I want to work on it, then that is the spouse who has to kind of be given the microphone in that moment.
Right.
Because you never want to miss on those cues. And if either spouse feels like something is off,
Right.
and you need to work on it.
And I think when we listen to our spouse's feelings, like with this question, when we do listen, it really builds security. And so the fact that her husband isn't really listening and is kind of dismissing it, it makes her feel insecure. And so, I hope he watches this and listens to this. Every time that you can just listen to however your spouse is feeling, even if it's totally different from you, even if you don't fully understand how they're feeling at that point, it will build that security in your marriage. So open up your heart and listen. We want to talk about this a lot more with you all. So please join the conversation at MarriageToday.com. We'll see you next time.
We hope you were encouraged by today's program.
This program is made possible by the generous support of our faithful partners.